Next posture is Marichyasana A, which is the first of 4 Maricyasanas. So we start the legs straight after we jump through, and we bend. We start with the right side, bending the right knee, closing the knee joint as much as possible, and planting that foot on the floor. And when you plant this foot, it's important that you leave space between the foot and the leg that's straight. And also it's important that you shift the weight forward. So this is important to kind of lift right away from the beginning, this right sit bone from the floor. That's gonna help us to move into the rest of the posture. So if that initial shift isn't possible for you, and it's difficult because you need a certain level of flexibility in the hamstrings and the hips to just get this initial shift, where you're bringing the weight into the right foot as if you could like really push into that right foot. Like if you wanted to stand. Standing would be difficult, but that's kind of the direction you're moving into. Instead of being like back here and you have the weight more into your pelvis rather than the foot. So shifting forward. So if that's difficult for you, grab a blanket. And this is gonna make the rest of the posture accessible. So it doesn't mean that, grabbing a blanket that you're kind of like cheating in the posture. It just means that you're giving yourself an opportunity to move into the rest of the posture and bring the ground up to you if that's what you need. So that helps you to kind of get this pivot in the pelvis that's necessary to shift the weight forward, come into the right foot, and lift that right sit bone off of the ground. All right? And then you just do the rest of the posture in the same way we're gonna go through right now. So this is a forward fold, and we're moving deeper into the hip flexion of the bent knee. So to go into it, I like to move that right knee out to the side, and that just gives you space to move into it. And then you fold forward. And again, lifting that right sit bone off the floor. And then once you've found your limit here of that hip flexion, like how far can you get the torso forward to pass the inside of the right thigh? You can stay here and play around here, either catching the inside of the left foot, inside of the left leg, and then that other hand behind you at a diagonal, helping you to reach the torso forward. Drawing the lower belly in and already thinking about squaring the shoulders evenly over that straight leg. Once you find your edge here, or wherever you are going for any particular day, maybe it's not your edge, you can draw that bent knee back in, where the inner thigh is sort of hugging the side of the torso. So from here, this is basically Marichyasana. The rest that we add on is sort of just to bind it up, but this is the focus of Marichyasana, this movement into the hip. And this is a movement into the hip that is going to become really important for future postures like Kurmasana and Supta Kurmasana. So if you want to keep going, you reach that right arm forward, spin the thumb down, and wrap the arm around the shin. And as you do that, you're internally rotating the shoulder. So that means when you bring the hand behind you, the palm is facing out. And here, you want to think about lifting that hand up as high as you can and dropping the elbow. So that's another continuous expression of the internal rotation in the shoulder. Lifting the hand, dropping the elbow. And then the bind here happens by bringing this other hand up and around. And I like to kind of make this really big, if that's helpful for you, to open up the shoulder joint. And as you bend the elbow, keep the elbow lifted to really get into the shoulder and make as much space as possible. And then you bind behind the hand, behind the back. You bind both hands behind the back. And then inhale here. And then you just continue moving into the hip flexion by folding forward. And then here, one thing that is common in the forward fold is kind of this collapsing in the shoulders, and it's collapsing through the heart and through the collarbones. So one thing I'd like to think about is if you do have that bind, think about moving the elbows away from each other and just see how that automatically opens up across the collarbones. So you keep the heart open, even though we're folding forward, even though we're kind of moving into this pranic shape, we're keeping the heart open and reaching the heart towards the toes. And the gaze can either be at the toes, but if you notice for me, like if you're at a certain point in the forward fold, looking at the toes sort of just kind of like jams the back of the neck and creates a lot of like tension in the back of the neck. So I elongate the back of the neck It just depends on where you are in the forward fold. Elongate the back of the neck, gaze at the tip of the nose, and instead think about reaching the crown of the head and the heart towards the toes. And that's just as good as looking at the toes. The same intention is there of continuing that energy forward, yeah? If you can't bind the hands, you could always make your arms longer by using a strap, or you could always stay in that first position that we talked about by holding onto the foot, keeping that hip lifted. And then one final thing with that bind behind you. There's different ways of binding. So I'm going to turn around so that you can see. So when we wrap this arm behind, the palm is facing back. And when you wrap this arm behind internal rotation, the palm is also facing back. So the question is, how do I bind? So you have some options. If you can get deep enough in the bind, you catch the wrist and both hands can be facing out, nothing needs to change. If that's too deep for you though, you can flip one of the hands. So I like to flip the hand that's not wrapping around the shin. I like to flip that hand so that you can bind. Or you can keep both palms facing out and kind of bring the knuckles in between each other and bind like this. This isn't as common, but you know, you do whatever feels comfortable in your shoulders. All right, that's it for now.